Okay, so this presentation is called Protecting Life. It's also called, in sacred and religious settings, it's also called Protecting the Creator's Works. To me, that's essentially the same idea. I was raised in First Baptist Church here in Austin. My father was a minister his entire life. And so to me, life itself offers the possibility of sacred relationship. And I mean that in every sense, psychologically, spiritually, and so forth. And we're also at this moment where our best opportunity for solving our global environmental issues is literally to protect life, literally to protect the Creator's works themselves. So my story with this project is that I began after 10 years of kind of working night and day on environmental issues and being very passionate, very excited, and relatively successful in some things. Like everyone, I knew we weren't still going fast enough to solve things like climate change. And I also started reading up on the extinction crisis, which is getting no coverage. And as an environmentalist, I'd always heard that the extinction crisis was driven by climate change. And then I started looking more into the extinction crisis because the little bit of trickles of information I was getting were just, calamitous. It's like, this is way worse than climate change right now. And my environmentalist community, we're not even talking about it. And so I decided I wanted to know what's the number one most impactful environmental solution on Earth? What's the thing that would do the most for climate change? What's the thing that would do the most for species loss and extinctions? What's the one thing we can each do or a company can do that means the most per dollar invested? Because to me, we're at a time where we need to be doing a lot more. And it turns out that the answer is protecting ecosystems. There's a couple of good reasons for that. The ecosystems themselves on our planet have been dramatically reduced in the last 45 years in terms of their total vitality. And also, they're our life support system. And also, the ecosystems that are disappearing the fastest are they're all in one region, and they have the greatest amount of biodiversity, and they're a critical part of the climate solution as well. So I'm going to show you those things today. I wanted to know the answer to that question. The other thing was I was tired of people not feeling this way about the future of life on Earth a year ago. And so this is a photo from a picnic that I produced over at First Baptist Church with my green team friends there. And I love this photo because, they're so excited about where they're going. It's just about being in the moment, and the potential for great things is in front of them. And clearly, our culture is not there at the moment, and we're divided in all kinds of ways. But these are the kinds of feelings that I want to try and create with this project, is that we're going forward, we're turning the ship away from the most serious environmental crisis in all of human history, and we're working together to do it. We're collaborating, we're creating more community, more of a shared identity. All these kinds of things that you see on the mission statement on the wall here. Okay, so in terms of ecosystems, the first thing to know, in terms of what I have to share with you, is that forests on terrestrial ecosystems, land-based ecosystems, forests are the most biodiverse. So in a single acre of forest soil, there can be as many as 100,000 unique species of microbiota. And you keep going up the sort of vertically from there. There are larger microbiota, then there's plant life, then there's insect life, then there's amphibians and freshwater fish and waterfowl if there's water, which is rarer here, but other forests, water's constant. And then there are rodents and reptiles and large and small mammals. And then, of course, in the trees, an incredible diversity of bird life. Ecosystems other than forests don't have as many resources for the other species. I tend to think of it as biodiversity as just sort of a category, is very much similar to us. They enjoy shelter. Species of all types enjoy shelter and enjoy a repetitive, regular resource base to live off of, and forests provide that. So the overwhelming majority of species diversity on Earth is congregated in forests, and also the diversity itself, the density of it is greater in forests. And when you look at the planet, tropical rainforests have this incredible consistency of climate, and they also have this incredible density of tree canopy. And so what that means is that these forests are not only the most biodiverse on our planet, but they're the most complex in terms of their structures, and they have these amazing, massive trees. There are massive trees in other parts of the world too, but tropical forests are the most carbon-dense ecosystems we have on land. So what that hails from is this simple thing that we call photosynthesis, or trees making oxygen is the way we think of it. But when carbon dioxide passes through the air, a tree will hold on to all of the carbon and let about 80% of the oxygen back into the atmosphere. So we think of this as purifying the air. What the tree is doing is growing. And the trees in the tropics, because they have year-round precipitation and warmth, are better at sequestering carbon consistently, day after day after day. And so when you look at the way that carbon density is distributed on land on our planet, the tropical forests have about 55% of all land-based carbon density. They also have 2/3 of all biodiversity, roughly speaking, from freshwater fish, which is sort of unfathomable. There's one little statistic that says there can be as many freshwater fish species in a single pool of the Amazon as there are species in the entire Atlantic Ocean. Fish species as there are in the Atlantic Ocean. It's just a dramatically diverse environment. And the same goes for all the other types of species we talked about. So this one solution of protecting these ecosystems, these tropical forest ecosystems, radically benefits us at global scale in terms of these two big crises we have, which I'm going to tell you more about in a second, the extinction crisis and the climate crisis you hear so much about. So climate first, and just a couple of bullet points on climate. The first is everyone is familiar with the idea that we have yet to start really reducing global emissions. We're getting closer and closer. We're making a lot of progress, and I'll show you some good news about that in a second. But we're still in global emissions annually. Second bullet point of 3 is in 2007, the head of the whole UN project of scientists called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, he said that if we don't stop increasing emissions at 2012, the end of 2011, we'll be headed into a worst-case scenario. And, you know, obviously weather in Texas has been really bad in 2015. 43 people died last weekend for the Christmas storms. Those deaths were from tornadoes and floods, and they happened basically December 23rd through December 29 in about 6 or 7 states. There was an article that came out yesterday, Saturday morning in the Statesman. 35,000 cattle died in snowdrifts in the Panhandle and New Mexico. And that kind of loss represents much more than just the economics, obviously much more than the cattle. One thing it represents is about half of Texas's dairies, Texas's best dairies, are out of business apparently for a while. And another thing it represents is a lot more animals, a lot more outdoor species, a lot more plants, a lot more of the ecosystem itself is being stressed to the point of death often. And we're there effectively. It's the concept of climate change and a worst-case scenario and so forth is here now. So we need really fast-acting, globally impactful solutions. One of the main drivers of climate change actually is burning tropical rainforests. So when you look at the IPCC's reports from 2007 and 2014, basically all these levels change on an annual basis. But basically, on average, burning up tropical forests for things like palm oil and beef cattle and soy and other types of development, those emissions are causing the third greatest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions to the global greenhouse gas problem. So not only are we burning down our best land-based carbon sequestration resource, but we're also putting more emissions into the atmosphere. Like in 2012, The EU, that's the European Union, put about 10 to 12% of global greenhouse gas emissions into the air that year, 2012. Tropical deforestation by fire was about 12% that year. We may have the same thing this year. There was a horrible, horrible outbreak of fire in Indonesia this fall, which I can show some of those slides if we need to. But this issue of burning up tropical forests is making our climate change problem worse on two levels. We're destroying our sequestration, our best sequestration, and we're releasing emissions at scale that just make our problem that much worse. The estimates are anywhere from 8 to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions in a given year of the last 30 years have come from tropical deforestation. Okay, so some good news here. We have the encyclical from Pope Francis. And I think that the focus on, again, community being what the sacred space is sort of about here as opposed to a deity, I'm so fascinated by. And I think the reason for that, as I say, is community is going to be one of the ways we really turn the ship here on these big challenges. Pope Francis's document is also sort of an ethical and a spiritual authority, and it's the first sort of moment in history where the leading religious figure has stood up and said things like, we need an integrated approach to combating poverty and protecting nature. As it turns out, the solution for the tropical rainforest also benefits indigenous people and uncontacted tribes. And we'll get into that in a moment as well, but that's one of the key table legs of how you protect forests in the long term, is to return it back to its wild state and develop relationships with the indigenous people there where they are not forced into your paradigm. And you're creating a collaborative stewardship-based economy, which is really what we need right now. We need to start talking about those kinds of values, stop being as extractive. And another great thing that's happened is the Paris Climate Accord. The Paris Climate Accord is really, really significant because it's now the first moment in human history that there's been a global governmental accord on these values that say humanity has the potential to accidentally destroy itself by destroying the environment. And so we need to work faster than we have been. The first point here, keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius. There's a really important narrative that I wish I had more time for, but basically the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming mark is the cutoff for African delegations, African nations. And the reason is because they say that the science clearly shows that if we go above 1.5, we've already gone to 1. If we go to 1.5 degrees Celsius, they call that genocidal warming, that will lose hundreds of millions of people, particularly in Africa. So the emphasis on 1.5, it's not about business, it's not about environment, it's about genocidal warming. And that's why that is finally in the conversation, because there is empathy for this idea that we don't want to destroy ourselves. We want to build a constructive future. And we're starting to have this kind of structure ethically at a global level. The second piece, preserve and protect forests and other ecosystems and use them as an asset in the climate solution. This is gratifying to me because I've been talking about this stuff for about a year, and suddenly it shows up. But I really believe that maybe the key thing for me to say today to everyone here and anyone watching is we need to be investing in not just technology, but also nature, equally in nature right now. That's one of the strategies that will really move us forward rapidly. And you'll see in a moment the urgency of doing that couldn't be greater. The idea of continuously improving is in the structure of this Paris Climate Accord, so that's brilliant. That basically means that we are going to expand the renewables industry as fast as possible and contract emissions as fast as possible and keep upping goals. And then, lastly, protecting the poor. And again, there's an aspect to this solution that is about empowering the poor, or what we call the poor, people who don't rely on Western commerce. There's also the reality that our wealthy nation, I was lucky enough to be born in Austin in 1971, and I've had this great quality of life that I was entitled to or I never asked for. But people in other nations in the world, such as in places in Africa that might be flooded or might have drought that's insurmountable, those people need our help. They need our help to protect their ecosystems, their ways of life, and to prepare them and provide them with economic tools to get through the kinds of things that we're seeing now, really on a quarterly basis. I think in 2015, we had 3 major deadly storms in 2015, right in this area, 2 in Wimberley and 1 in Garland, Texas. So there's a lot of work that we need to do in terms of thinking about our membership at a global level and with the rest of humanity. More good news here. This is a chart showing how rapidly wind has grown since 1996, and it ends in 2014. So it's more than 100% growth in 10, 15, 20 years. I'm not sure Al or someone might know what this portion of global electricity is being generated by wind, but the fact is that renewables are here. They're proven. They've worked, yes, because of some government help. They've worked more so because the people have led, and they have demanded these great technologies that solve environmental problems and create economic assets for them. And you're seeing incredible growth in renewables, and it's consistent and it's going straight up. So this is solar worldwide in the last 10 years. And we went from, I don't know, will it work, to get in as fast as you can. And if we have more time, we'll talk about Germany and things like that. Same thing with electric vehicles. It's also really good news. And, one of the cool things to look forward to in the world is the 2017 Tesla that will be $35,000. And we'll all have access to the first affordable luxury car. And they say they're the best cars ever built in the world. They're also zero emissions cars. And then lastly, energy storage has been a thing that back in 2010, when I was really involved at City Hall, they were just like, well, there's no energy storage. I don't know how we can possibly go renewable, because renewables, generate electricity when the wind blows or the sun shines. But the fact of the matter is we're essentially there as well with battery packs and large-scale energy, utility-scale energy storage. We have those products. This Tesla Power Pack product is open intellectual property, so that the concept for the company there is that they can't scale up fast enough to meet what is the environmental demand globally. So they're trying to empower companies in other countries to build these products to help us all. Okay, the only thing that really hasn't improved in terms of things that are generating emissions is deforestation. So this is an area kind of hard to see on the slide exposure, but you get the general idea. This is twice the size of Texas, and then you can see it's just a 20-year period. These forests, these tropical rainforests that ultimately are the ecosystems that I'm promoting as we need your help today. These ecosystems have a lineage that goes back about 100 million years. And our species is only about 100,000 years old. And when you think through, like, how the, humans emerged and so forth, and the amount of diversity that's in tropical forests from the soil level on up, and where primates congregate and primates are from, and we're descended from primates, tropical forests are part of our story. And the global loss is unfortunately catastrophic relative to when I was born in 1971. So in the last 45 years, what I've circled is where you should look below. So if we start with the Atlantic tropical forest in Brazil, it's been reduced about 95% in the last 45 years or so. If you go over to the western Congo in Africa, point with my other arm, that's been reduced more than 50%. Madagascar, this little island, more than 90%. And then these forests are the most biodiverse subtropical and temperate forests, essentially India to China, and they've been just completely fragmented. That's what you saw, the larger slide, a piece of that earlier. Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, this area of south of tropical Asian islands, has lost, at this point, probably 75% of the Indonesian and Malaysian forests. And then back over to Central America, it's been tremendously fragmented, and the Amazon's been reduced about 25%. So we lose an acre a second to deforestation right now. That rate of loss has been happening since judging by all the mappings I see, since at least 1980, maybe since 1970. and we've lost something like 2.2 million square miles between 1970 and 2010. It's just from a climate change perspective, climate change encourages us to think about the globe as a whole ecosystem itself. And from a climate change perspective, we've taken out, again, this exceptional life support system just in terms of the way it mitigates the sun's heat island effect on the planet, the way it sequesters carbon, the way it regulates precipitation, and the way it regulates storm systems and so forth because of its mass. We've reduced it from occupying 14% of lands in about 1970 to now 6 or less % of global lands. But when we protect them, they're these beautiful, beautiful things. And the vision here is about not just saving the last forests on Earth. It's about the values of restoring and reconnecting these forests also. And, thinking globally about how humanity can start to live in a more integrated way with these global ecosystems that we need. So this is a project that we helped via First Baptist Church and Bob and Patty at St. Andrew's Presbyterian. And it was a little wildlife corridor that connected two larger preserves. So this species in particular was critically endangered. It basically lived in one of those preserves, and its resource base got doubled. These orchids grow only in this region and one other in the world. And this little guy, who's clearly the Ewok model, was just discovered a few years ago. But all of these species and hundreds or thousands or even millions more, if you think about the soil components, now are protected to continue existing, continue providing us with these ecological life support system services. Here's one in Guatemala, and this was going to be, I'll go into more detail on a particular project, but I just want to give you a feel for some of these things. These are some of the species protected here. A coffee company in Japan was going to come in and just destroy the forest and put in coffee bean plants, put in a plantation. And there is an extremely integrated relationship between the indigenous people and their forest and the lifestyle and the culture and all these things. So one of the groups here in Austin called Global Wildlife Conservation worked to protect this place. And I should clarify, actually, my whole role here with biointegrity is to educate and to, again, according to the mission statement, help the world's best solutions, most global environmental solutions, succeed as fast as possible. So I'm a fundraiser for those causes. That's why, if you have the takeaway, there's a project you can donate to on the back, which we won't push that message today. But I will push the impact of that, the benefits of that, so you understand this opportunity. The biodiversity crisis, or the extinction crisis, has some pretty heavy factoids. So according to an annual study, or an ongoing annual study conducted by World Wildlife Fund, between 1970 and 2010, more than half of the world's wildlife was just destroyed. And a different study came out in June that said if we just do the math, the simple math, 1 + 1 is 2, and don't factor in climate change or any other of the kind of challenges that we see right now, 75% of all animal life on Earth will be extinct within the next 3 human lifetimes. So the time to act is literally now. I think it's fair and realistic to say we have 5 years to keep this problem from getting even worse relative to our quality of life. And so these are short-term kind of projections on how fast things are disappearing. Again, the rate of loss in these ecosystems and the fragmentation of these ecosystems, particularly in the tropics, is what's driving the extinction crisis. And people want to know literally, why is all this bad stuff happening? It's a simple answer. Again, our species is about 100,000 years old. It took us about that long, 100,000 years, to get to 1 billion people, and then just 123 years to get to 2 billion. And I know people who were around when we hit 2 billion that are still alive. And now we're at 7.35, maybe 7.36 billion. We add over 100 million extra people, really closer to 150 million extra people to Earth right now every year. So we're just increasing demands. We're destroying habitat. The number one driver of this problem is habitat destruction and fragmentation, where you're just whittling down the ability of species to survive. So by protecting these ecosystems and reconnecting these ecosystems, we can start to reverse that process, start to help nature refill the cup. The extinctions are severe. We lose 100 to 200, the official kind of talk now is 100 to 200 species go extinct every day. And that's driven by tropical deforestation. Because we're losing an acre a second, that adds up to 80,000 to 100,000 acres every day that just go. And the losses, of course, are across the entire spectrum, from the microbiota to the macro that you're seeing here. One interesting thing, about 3.5 billion years ago, somewhere in that range, the first cells emerged in water, and it took them quite a while to turn into life, more complicated than that. Then about 600 million years ago, the first land-based species started to emerge. And the first forests were maybe 400 million years ago. The planet was a hot, more tropical place back then. All these things have happened. There's been various extinction events along the way. But we're now the result. This doesn't have the thing, but we're here on this spectrum. So again, the ecosystems themselves, they mean everything to us. So this one solution, this protecting tropical rainforests, has true global impact. I'm going to get into that with a couple of much shorter presentations. This is the long-winded one. But by protecting of all the ecosystems we have, by protecting tropical forests first, we're not only protecting the greatest density of biodiversity per dollar invested that we can at a time when they're disappearing faster than they've ever disappeared in not just human history, but in the last 65 million years, and possibly longer. But we're also protecting ourselves from making the climate change problem much worse. So we can literally reduce potential global emissions by thousands of tons or hundreds of thousands of tons by simple donations to these conservation projects that are globally strategic and protect species. And let me just jump over to that one, since that's a good bridge. How's everybody doing? No one's fallen asleep? Okay, let's look at the sort of economic rationale on these things. So the smallest mocha at Starbucks is $3.99. And the project that's on the back of your takeaway is in Sumatra, and it's $3.41 per acre. So for less than the smallest mocha at Starbucks, you can protect an acre of an ecosystem. That means, again, everything to us in terms of the oxygen system. About 20% of the global oxygen cycle is generated by this very small ecosystem now, the tropical rainforests. And again, the values on carbon sequestration and so forth. This particular project has 2 indigenous communities that will benefit from the way the project is designed. And the global integrity of ecosystems will begin to be restored as well with this approach. So here's the options, of things we can do today. And I also just want to share a comparison for scale's sake. Again, I think we need to invest in technology and nature equally. And the good news is that the investments in nature are tremendously more impactful to sort of the metrics that I started with as an environmentalist. So $100 put into greening up your home, which is what I used to do with my EcoStore. I know this area extremely well. And I was very excited about helping people eliminate 1 ton of CO2 10 years ago. But changing your light bulbs and those kinds of things, the net impact in terms of the metrics is about 4 tons of CO2 removed over a 20-year period or something like that. A windmill or a solar panel can't do much for $100, but they're very important. I'm not trying to downplay them or anything. I'm just saying comparatively. And then this represents a product that we environmentalists love called carbon offsets. And so for $100, you get about 8 tons offset through any of a couple of mechanisms. But for $100, where it's $3.41 an acre in a region of the world that has 100-million-year-old forests that are being set on fire right now, and you can help increase the federal protection with this particular project and the conservation staffing and the relationship with the indigenous people there. So you have 3 layers of protection for this place. That particular value, there's over 200 tons of stored carbon dioxide per acre. We'll get back to that in a second too. That particular value of 29 acres keeps about 5,800 tons of greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere off the bat, and then continues to sequester carbon. And then that same $100 will protect species in this place. It's part of a larger project. And again, this is the one on the back of your takeaway. And then this place again helps protect 2 indigenous communities, which is a very real and significant, sincere problem. Obviously, the Tonkawa were the indigenous people here. And we have a culture of erasing that, and that needs to stop as well. And there's millions of brilliant reasons for us developing a more compassionate globalization, more stewardship-oriented capitalism, and so forth. So this is how the investments kind of compare. And this is why I started biointegrity, because I saw this and I said, everybody should know this, especially people like Al Braden, who care so passionately about eliminating emissions, protecting the future of life on Earth. This is the winning strategy to move fast. And then let me show you a little bit quickly about this beautiful project, and then we'll do Q&A. Yeah? Good. 1 second here. Okay, so again, there's a project on the back of your sheet that's in Sumatra. Sumatra is in Indonesia. And this project is one of the services biointegrity is providing, which it's not a nonprofit yet. It will probably become a nonprofit. So if you want to donate to this project and make it tax deductible, give through Rainforest Trust, one of the biointegrity partners. And I'll tell you more about them in a moment. So Indonesia is this fascinating place. Biologically, it's the third, in terms of the countries of the world, it's got the 3rd greatest density of diversity in its forests. I believe probably the greatest density of diversity overall, because the concentration of coral reefs around Indonesia is tremendous. There are 18,000 islands or so in that nation. They're also oftentimes the 3rd greatest emitter of greenhouse gases. This may be another year for that. And they are essentially number 1 in eliminating their prehistoric forests relative to the most important forests we have left. So this is showing the increasing rate of deforestation there between 2000 and 2012. So here's where we are in the world. And this is Sumatra. This is where the project is. And then this is showing how rapidly deforestation has affected Sumatra. So it starts out in 1950, and it's basically rubber plantations for tires and things. And then the 60s, some rice plantations. And then in about 89, the palm oil businesses start to consume all the forest on the island. So at least 75% of the old growth forests have been consumed between 1950 and 2010. And, that's the urgency piece of this, is that any delay to help a protected area means that it will likely disappear. That we could lose all tropical forests on Earth in another 40 years or less at the rate we're going. So you can help prevent that from happening and again, help turn the ship. There's also, in this particular project, by supporting it, you're helping 3 extremely beautiful, charismatic, endangered species that are at the last stop before extinction. So there are about 400 of these Sumatran tigers. This is a critically endangered species, in other words. And 10% of them live here. 10% of the mature adults live here in this particular preserve. There's also basically our aunts and uncles, the orangutans, and they are being reintroduced here with this wonderful project that's helping to reconnect the forests, of Indonesia, which I'll tell you about them as well a little bit. And then finally, the third critically endangered species here that you can help save from extinction is this Sumatran elephant. And so this is from the site. And there are 11 elephants together there. They're a very social animal. They're very emotionally intelligent animals. That they talk about elephants as the guardians of the forest, that they're the ones that really keep the ecosystem together at the end of the day. And they're just essential to so many things, our spiritual lives, our relationships with our children, so they're here as well. And then this is a quick montage of some of the other species there. Really, really amazing stuff that we can't reproduce. These are irreplaceable ecological things, and so that's some of the numbers there. Over 190 bird species, 1,500 plant species, etc. There's also these two indigenous groups that we talked about. So the Orang Rimba people, that basically means forest people. Orangutan means forest man or something like that. Orang Rimba is forest people. And they live there full time. They still rely on the forest 100%. The Talang Mamak people have a more distributed culture around the region, but some of them live there and they still use it for spiritual and ceremonial aspects, community celebrations, and so forth. This is really fast what it sort of looks like and where we are in the world. The partnerships on this particular project and the projects that Biointegrity is recommending are always really strong. And so there are multiple criteria to the Biointegrity kind of recommendation process. And so the partners here, the federal government of Indonesia created a new model, a new legal model, so that this place will be protected and restored. And this will be the first one of those projects. So it's been collaboration between World Wildlife Fund and some other groups. And then the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, that usually makes people go, oh, now I got to do it. Let's see. And Rainforest Trust and Orangutan Project and many others also, the local groups. Rainforest Trust, super briefly, is my partner, Biointegrity's partner. They're the most outstanding, I think, of the rainforest conservation groups that are small, independent, and super efficient. So they're 4-star rated with Charity Navigator. And on average, about 93% of what's donated goes straight to the project. And now they've actually protected 11 million acres. A friend of mine made that slide several months ago, and they just added about 3.5 million acres to that number. And Biointegrity donors have protected over 37,000 acres in the first year, so that's pretty cool. The Orangutan Project is this Australian group that's managing the park already with wildlife patrols and so forth, fire patrols. And they're part of this network of other Australian groups. And the way conservation is organized oftentimes is around the animal, the most attractive species. You can talk to somebody who likes bears about saving bears, but what you're really doing is saving bear habitat, which really means you're saving an ecosystem, which is, again, back to the sort of bigger picture stuff. And so this network of different species and stuff, they're all in Indonesia. And there's a variety of Australian zoos and other Australian conservation groups. And they're here. They're already running the project. They're here in this place, rather. I love that photo. That's of the place. So the plan, super fast, is these two groups that I've mentioned, Rainforest Trust and Orangutan Project, are sort of managing the ecosystem restoration concession is what the government created. So there are timber concessions, and basically you get a lease, and you can cut down as many trees as you want. Or you get a palm concession, you can destroy the environment and put in a palm plantation. 100 million-year-old forest just goes. But this is the opposite of that. This is saying we're going to protect this place for ecosystem purposes and restoration purposes of that ecosystem. This is ideal. They have 3 concessions in a row, so they're 20 years each. And during that 60-year period, they'll transfer ownership of the park into national park status. So it has even more protections. And KHUS is the economic initiative, the sort of social justice piece, where they're working with the Orang Rimba and the Talang Mamak peoples to create crafts and other types of ecotourism and stuff, so they can have income coming into that ecosystem that doesn't hamper the ecosystem or alter the ecosystem in any way. Allows it to restore. More wildlife protection unit patrols, and again, the long-term game here is to move this into national park status. And the carbon values, I think I'm long on time here. Yes? Okay, good. Well, this is the very end, actually, of the talky stuff. So the carbon values here, again, are immense. These are some of the most carbon-dense forests on Earth, upwards of, in some cases, 400 to 800 tons in a single acre, just in above-ground biomass, just in these trees. So when a tree intakes all that carbon, it holds onto it to make its biomass. 50% of a tree is just carbon. And if the tree is burned, then that carbon's released and it rebonds with oxygen to make CO2. And that's why we have these horrendous greenhouse gas emissions coming from destroying these places. We round way down on this one because this is a restoration project. So some of the old growth is there and some is not. And then there's a sequestration value as well. And last but not least, my partner, rainforesttrust.org, so that's on your sheet. And you can prevent fires and pollution. Thank you so much for listening to me talk. And I really ask for your help with this project, and I'm available to talk after, and let's do some Q&A.